Choosing your very first ultra high-end watch is less about spending the most money and more about avoiding the single decision that could quietly sabotage your long-term passion for horology. When people imagine their entrance into the rarefied air of haute horlogerie, they often picture a meteoric leap straight into the stratosphere with something instantly recognizable, aggressively priced, and socially explosive. Yet paradoxically, the worst possible first ultra-high-end purchase is usually the piece acquired for the wrong psychological reason, rather than the wrong mechanical one. And that is why starting with a hyper-hyped status symbol from a powerhouse like Rolex can be a strategic misstep if your primary motivation is validation instead of curiosity. Because when a watch becomes a billboard for approval rather than a private object of fascination, your relationship with it becomes fragile, externally dependent, and ultimately unsatisfying, especially in a market where steel sports models fluctuate like equities, and where the thrill of acquisition often fades once the Instagram post loses momentum, leaving you with an object whose mythology you inherited but never personally discovered, which is a dangerous foundation for a collector who has not yet learned to differentiate between intrinsic craft and market-driven noise, between the architecture of a movement and the architecture of hype, between quiet finishing details and loud brand equity. And if your first step into serious collecting is dictated by waiting lists, gray market premiums, and resale spreadsheets, you risk training your instincts around speculation rather than scholarship, around scarcity rather than substance, and around peer perception rather than personal taste, which makes the watch feel less like an heirloom and more like a tradable asset, a dynamic that can poison the emotional core of what should be a deeply individual pursuit. Another category of catastrophic first choices is the impossibly grand complication acquired too soon, the kind of mechanical cathedral that demands reverence before you have learned the alphabet of watchmaking. Because beginning with a perpetual calendar minute repeater from a titan such as Patek Philippe may sound like the ultimate flex, yet it deprives you of the developmental journey that gives those complications meaning. And without prior experience owning simpler three-hand or chronograph pieces, you lack the tactile vocabulary to appreciate the tolerances, the acoustic engineering, the energy management constraints, and the intellectual lineage that makes such mechanisms miraculous. Which means the watch risks becoming an abstract trophy rather than a living machine you understand. And beyond the philosophical issue, there is a practical one. Servicing complexity at this level is not merely expensive, but logistically intricate, with long turnaround times, brand-controlled maintenance channels, and limited independent alternatives. So your inaugural foray into the upper echelon may quickly transform into anxiety about wearing, damaging, or even winding the piece, leading you to store it in a safe more often than on your wrist, which contradicts the essential purpose of a watch as an object meant to accompany lived experience. And by skipping the intermediate stages of collecting, you compress the arc of discovery into a single overwhelming purchase that leaves little room for evolution, nuance, or incremental appreciation, effectively robbing yourself of the slow burn education that makes high horology emotionally sustainable. Equally treacherous as excessive heritage is excessive futurism, particularly when the first ultra-high-end watch is an avant-garde spectacle engineered to shock rather than to endure. Because while the skeletalized, torque-limited, aerospace-inspired constructions of Richard Mille are undeniably feats of modern material science, choosing such a piece as your introduction can distort your baseline expectations of what a watch should be, both aesthetically and financially. Given that the brand's signature tonneau cases in carbon composites and sapphire crystals, suspended movements, and racing-derived shock-resistant systems are designed for a clientele already comfortable navigating seven-figure price tiers and niche servicing ecosystems. And if your horological identity is still forming, anchoring it to an ultra-contemporary design language may narrow your palette prematurely, making traditional finishing, classical proportions, and restrained dials seem underwhelming by comparison, which can stunt your ability to appreciate the centuries-old craft traditions that underpin the entire industry. And furthermore, these watches often trade within volatile micro-markets heavily influenced by celebrity associations and limited production runs. So your emotional investment becomes entangled with speculative fervor, while the sheer visual audacity of such a piece may limit its versatility. making it challenging to integrate into formal contexts, professional environments, or understated settings, thereby transforming your first grail into a situational accessory rather than a daily companion. Then, there is the siren call of the integrated bracelet steel sports icon, particularly from houses like Audemars Piguet, whose angular designs have achieved near mythic status. Yet beginning your journey with a watch whose identity is inseparable from a single silhouette can inadvertently lock you into a stylistic cul-de-sac. Because when the market crowns one model as the ultimate expression of taste, the risk is that you outsource your aesthetic judgment to consensus. And consensus is fickle, shaped by influencers, auction headlines, and celebrity sightings, meaning that what feels timeless today may feel oversaturated tomorrow. And beyond stylistic concerns, there is the matter of proportionality, as many integrated bracelet sports watches wear boldly on the wrist with expansive dials and distinctive geometry that command attention, which can overwhelm someone unaccustomed to living with such visual dominance, leading to buyer's remorse once the initial adrenaline subsides. And since these pieces often trade at substantial premiums above retail, your entry point is financially elevated, compressing potential upside while magnifying downside exposure, thereby turning your first serious acquisition into a high-stakes bet rather than a measured initiation. And because these watches are so instantly recognizable within enthusiast circles, they can overshadow your personal narrative, reducing conversations to model references and resale trajectories instead of the deeper discussion of craftsmanship and history that might otherwise enrich your collecting education. Another perilous route is the flamboyant, gem-encrusted, mechanically extravagant showpiece from a brand such as Jacob & Co., where astronomical complications, multi-axis tourbillons, and kaleidoscopic stones converge into kinetic sculpture. Because while such watches are engineering marvels, they are also polarizing objects that demand a lifestyle and sartorial confidence few first-time collectors truly possess, and acquiring one prematurely can create social friction in professional or understated environments, making you self-conscious rather than empowered. And from a liquidity perspective, the secondary market for highly customized, diamond-laden creations is narrower and more volatile than for more restrained pieces, which means your capital may be concentrated in an asset whose buyer pool is limited, while the theatrical nature of the design may eclipse subtler pleasures such as hand-finished anglage, black polishing, or traditional engraving. Pleasures you might never learn to seek if your baseline expectation of value is perpetual spectacle. And the maintenance considerations for complex, visually intricate watches can also be daunting, involving proprietary components and specialized expertise that tie you closely to the manufacturer, reducing flexibility and increasing long-term ownership costs, thereby turning what should be an inspiring first step into a burdensome commitment. A more understated but equally problematic mistake is beginning with an ultra-purist insider's darling from an independent atelier like F.P. Journe, not because the watches lack merit, but because they require a cultivated eye and contextual understanding to fully appreciate. And without familiarity with the broader landscape of Swiss and German traditions, the significance of design cues, movement architecture, and finishing philosophy may not resonate, causing you either to undervalue the piece or to cling to it defensively as a badge of connoisseurship you have not yet earned, which can foster imposter syndrome rather than genuine pride. And independents often operate with limited production, selective client relationships, and nuanced allocation processes, so your buying experience may be shaped by scarcity dynamics that overshadow organic discovery, while resale markets for certain references can swing dramatically based on auction results and collector sentiment, adding a speculative layer that complicates what should be an educational phase. And because many independents emphasize restrained aesthetics and subtle dial layouts, a newcomer accustomed to mainstream branding may struggle to articulate why the watch is exceptional, weakening the emotional feedback loop that reinforces satisfaction, thereby transforming an objectively brilliant creation into a personally ambiguous investment. There is also the temptation to equate maximal price with maximal legitimacy, leading some first-time buyers toward ultra-rare, astronomically priced manufacturers such as Grubel Forsey, whose multi-level tourbillons, inclined escapements, and obsessive hand finishing represent the apex of mechanical artistry. Yet starting at the summit deprives you of altitude to climb, leaving little narrative progression in your collecting story, and potentially isolating you from the broader community. Because when your baseline is already 6 or 7 figures, incremental upgrades become impractical, and diversification becomes capital intensive, while the sheer fragility and rarity of such pieces can discourage regular wear, relegating them to climate-controlled storage and occasional showcases, which undermines the experiential dimension of ownership, and the psychological pressure associated with safeguarding an object of extreme value can quietly erode the spontaneous joy that should define your early years in high watchmaking, replacing curiosity with caution and wonder with worry, until the watch feels less like a celebration of human ingenuity and more like a responsibility too heavy for a first chapter. If there is one idea I want you to carry with you after this deep dive, it is this. The worst first ultra-high-end watch is never about the logo on the dial, whether it comes from Rolex, Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet, Richard Mille, F.P. Journe, Jacob & Co., or Grubel Forsey, but about the intention that guides your hand when you sign the receipt. Because when ego, pressure, hype, or insecurity dictate that decision, even the most extraordinary piece of engineering can become emotionally hollow. Whereas when curiosity, patience, and self-knowledge lead the way, even the comparatively modest high-end watch can ignite a lifelong passion that deepens with every service, every scratch, every conversation, and every quiet glance at your wrist. So before you chase the loudest grail, the rarest complication, or the most explosive investment narrative, take the time to build your taste deliberately, to handle as many pieces as possible, to study movements, finishing techniques, historical context, and design language, and to ask yourself not which watch will impress the room, but which one you would still love if no one else ever noticed it. Because your first step into ultra-high-end horology should not be a climax, it should be a foundation, not a headline, but a prologue. And if you get that first chapter right, the rest of your collecting journey will unfold with coherence, confidence, and genuine satisfaction.